If you have kids in sports, or you'll have kids in sports soon, or you just feel like there is a little too much of sports going on in our society today, then this book just might be for you. Today I'll be reviewing Take Back the Game by Linda Flanagan. Take Back the Game actually dives deep into a side of youth sports that is often overlooked. For example, the pressure, the expectations, and the financial demands that are placed on families and children. The author of the book, Flanagan, she herself is a longtime sports journalist and a former athlete who argues that youth sports in America have really shifted from a focus on fun and health and development to a hyper-competitive industry. And that this shift, she believes, is fueled by both parents' ambitions and a growing sports economy eager to profit. You can see that in this book, Flanagan traces how youth sports became a $19 billion industry and really shows how sports programs often prioritize profits over the well-being of young athletes. And she is using all sorts of anecdotal evidence as well as some pieces of large-scale evidence to show how that everything from the psychological toll on kids to the financial strain on parents who often feel pressured to pour thousands of dollars into club fees, gear, and travel, all of that is influencing and changing the trajectory of sports. And of course, you are seeing an increased activity in some levels, and you actually over the years have certainly had more student athletes at the collegiate level. What you haven't necessarily had is a whole lot more income at the collegiate level. And so you are starting to see a lot of schools reckoning with just how they can afford their sports programs, even if they are not necessarily taking in more sports. Anyone who is familiar with large football schools think that, well, the football program can certainly fund them, but that is simply not true for the vast majority of schools. I think there's what, I don't know, like 130 or so FBS teams, and then maybe another 130 so of FCS teams. But even that comes out to less than 300 schools, and we have thousands of universities with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of student athletes. And that is important because all of that is putting even more pressure on the parents to find some ways for their child to get an edge, even if it is making it harder for that school to have scholarships and to bring in more and more student athletes. Not to mention the ongoing question of what exactly is the value of a student athlete. I think if you look at most sports in colleges, you'd say, well, I think there's certainly still an argument to be made there. And then, of course, we have the two elite sports of football and basketball that are completely changing that conversation because they are going above and beyond in how much they take in. And those are the types of things that I think really complicate the system that you are seeing. And I will say that another issue is, despite the increase in money and the increase of participation in certain levels, you're less financially independent individuals, people that come from a lower tax bracket, actually have a dramatic decrease in participation in sports over the last couple of decades. That also goes back to that book that I've referenced before, Bowling Alone, that came out in the mid-90s, that was also targeting the fact that we have not people just being involved in fewer sports, but in fewer clubs and everything altogether. But you actually see that most dramatically in the lower income bracket, and even your middle income families start to see it become much more stressful on them when, especially if you have a family that has two working parents, all of a sudden it becomes so much harder for there to be any parent at your Saturday activities or your weekday activities, especially if the student athlete has to be driven there. And so these are types of things that are making it even more harder for what was meant to broadly be something for students to do, not necessarily with ease, but definitely not with such complications and such challenges to people's home lives and the structure of their families. Like I said, she uses a lot of anecdotal evidence. That's not to say that there's no value in it, but she certainly talks to a lot of people that comment on the fact that they have had to make sacrifices of not just time, but of doing things they actually want to do, as well as some financial sacrifices for them to take their children to all these different camps or to go to all these different leagues. Because of course, even if you're playing for your school, that is usually only going to be one season. And for a lot of people, instead of playing in multiple sports at one school year, they instead play the same sport, but they just go and play at a league in one place, at maybe for a rec center in another place, and then of course for their school in one of those seasons. You can see how that is going to continue the pressure that's being put on an individual, and it's also robbing that individual of diversity in activities. And all of those are going to be things that she addresses and things that she thinks needs to be addressed in terms of getting back to what is the actual most important value of sports. That is not necessarily a prolonged conversation about winning and losing and all of that, but just specifically about sports being one element of an individual's life and not necessarily the defining element of someone's life. And I think that's one of the things that she's really trying to get at with that book. I would say in this book that there are certainly some critiques that might feel just a little too one-sided. I don't think that, I mean, she's obviously trying to make a point, so she's going to spend a fair amount of time on some of the negative aspects, especially how it might deprive individuals of, more diversity in their activities. But I do think there was also a fair amount of room for a more balanced view on some of the positive aspects of competitive sports. Obviously this brings incredible discipline and teamwork, and I do think there are certainly things that she could have touched upon, but that wasn't the point, and so she didn't. And so I think that's obviously something you're going to see in every book of this kind. I would be interested in seeing either a follow-up, not necessarily from her, but from somebody else, that continues to explore what exactly the shape of youth sports is at this time, and how does that contrast to years before. That wasn't exactly her intention in this. I know that might seem the case, but I think she was a little too insistent on trying to draw a contrast to a long forgotten time period instead of actually giving me statistics and exploration of changes in the quality of sports, the opportunities of sports. I think she was a little too focused on how she was raised to give a quality contrast to how things have changed in, say, just the last 20 years or so. I certainly would have appreciated a little more information in that respect. And so I think that there's probably a book out there that could give you a fuller picture or certainly make a slightly different argument. And if there is one, I would probably like to read that too, because I do find this a fascinating element, because it is becoming an increasingly important part of our children's lives, and just trying to determine how to give everyone a leg up in what we consider to be a complicated society. So who is this for? Well, anyone that's just curious about some of the things that complicate modern society, especially modern family society, in regards to how time is spent, how resources are being allocated. There's certainly an element of class or socioeconomic issues that are affecting that. You may really enjoy this book if you are perhaps, have children that are about to be of the age in which sports become incredibly important, or if you're trying to decide when you think that age should be. I do think this could be a very good resource for seeing what are the long-term impacts of choosing when exactly a sport becomes the most important sport to a child, or more importantly, deciding should a single sport become what really defines them. And I think this is a good book for helping to shape that conversation and see if that's what you want to do. So who is in this book for? Well, I would say that this book is not going to be for anyone that really doesn't care about sports, or if they think that this is going to be like some big takedown of sports in general, like you hated all the jocks at your school and you think this book is somehow going to validate that. I don't think it does that. I don't know how many people want that. Instead, it actually kind of glamorizes sports to a certain degree, but then it is also really just arguing for making sure that sports have a certain element of flexibility and certainly a certain element of purpose that is broader, and not just about giving you a leg up, trying to get you into the best university, but more specifically, just trying to give you that element of well-roundedness. So if you don't think that's important about sports, then you may not exactly care for this book, or if you're just looking for a different type of argument. Of course, I would like to know what you guys think about this book. Please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.